Learning and development has seemed to be stuck in order taker mode for years, but it doesn't have to be that way. In this episode of Modern Learning on the Air, Jess Almlie shares insights from her book, L&D Order Taker No More, and explores what it really takes for learning teams to become strategic business partners. From building business acumen to managing stakeholder relationships and learning how to say no strategically, this conversation offers a practical and honest look at what needs to change. If you've ever felt stuck responding to requests instead of shaping solutions, this episode is for you. Jess, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, David.
I'm thrilled to have you here. One of the patterns I've seen over the years in L&D is that we spend a lot of time responding to requests, but not always as much time shaping the solution. And I'm really looking forward to having that discussion with you here today. So I'd love to start with the core idea behind your book. What do you mean by order taker, and why does L&D fall into that problem?
Yeah, well, I think order taker is kind of just what it sounds like. It's this reactive where most of us, our work comes from requests from other people, not instead of proactive. We're not the ones driving the work. We're just responding. I don't know if David James likes to call this the L&D storefront model. So we're
I like
open
that.
for business. Come
Yeah.
and tell us what you want and we'll provide it to you. I mean, David, one of my first jobs ever, I worked at McDonald's. I was very much an order taker. So it's that same kind of thing. And I think we have fallen into this work for years. Historically, we worked this way for years. So this respond to what the business asks us is our legacy. And it's really become expected. That's the way that we expect learning and development to work. I, however, believe learning and development needs to evolve beyond this. And there's been conversation about this for years because I don't think we can really fulfill our purpose in the organization when we're working in a way that's just responsive to what other people are asking us for. However, I also think most people in the organization aren't thinking about this. So our
Okay.
stakeholders who we're in the organization with, they aren't going home at night thinking, gosh, I wonder if learning and development could be more effective. They think the way that we're working together is working, and we know we could be more impactful.
So I find it interesting that you say that you use the word legacy, because I agree with that. Having been in this field long enough that I've stopped putting a number on it. We do see that. We do see that pattern that there's kind of this acceptance or almost habitual nature to what organizations expect from L&D that enables us to still be in this space. So I'm just kind of curious, first off, why do you think that legacy exists? What is driving the external expectations that we're delivering on, which are not really that high?
I mean, I think there's a couple of different things. One is it's just the history of our profession. So our profession, as you know, we really came to be in the Industrial Revolution when we were pulling farmers out of fields and into factories, and we needed to educate them on new jobs at scale. And we took the university model because at that time that was an elite model. And so it must be the best. So we pull people into classrooms and we educate them. Worked, I think, okay. They still needed to do, they found the on the floor one-on-one training. It couldn't substitute for that, the apprenticeship type stuff. But because of that, I think we got into this very formalized. We ask learning and development to do education, and that's what they do. So some of it just morphed from our history, but then we have been very good ourselves in learning and development at ensuring whether or not we mean to, we keep that model in place over the years. So we haven't been able to shift the needle. And I mean, we like to blame it on other people. I don't think it's always other people's faults. I think there's a lot of factors, but it came from that legacy and then it's just been perpetuated over the years.
It's an interesting point that sometimes we blame the environment that we're in, but you made the point that it's not always someone else's fault. What do you mean by that?
So this is an interesting question. I did, as part of the research for my book, I interviewed dozens and dozens of learning leaders, all different sizes of companies, all different industries. And a couple of the key questions I asked were, if you're able to work more often as a strategic business partner, what do you do differently? If not, what's holding you back? The first responses to what's holding you back are always outside of ourselves. It's always organizational. It's always we want to blame someone else almost. So it's, oh, leadership doesn't see us this way, or we don't have enough resources to do this, or politically it's not going to work in our organization, something to that degree. But when we dive a little deeper, what we see is that the actions that learning and development typically is taking in an organization are all really reinforcing this order taking mindset. And so there is a need for us to turn the mirror around, if you will. And the good news is that's the easiest thing to change. I mean, we can't necessarily change how somebody thinks about us from a leadership perspective right away, but we can change the way that we approach the work. So we do things that we think are helpful, David, but in reality, those are the very same things that are keeping us stuck in this order taking mode. I like to say we're masters in the art of unintentional self sabotage. So we reinforce these behaviors that we're trying to change. And there's a long list of them that we can go through if you'd like, a few
Yeah,
of them
I'd
at
love to
least.
hear some. Yeah, let's. What are some specific examples that you can share?
Yeah, I mean, a few of them. Whenever we take and deliver on an order as requested, we're basically just saying, yep, that's the way you work with us.
Hmm.
Whenever we deliver on a miracle and somebody says, we need this learning in 2 weeks and sorry, we forgot to ask you earlier, or maybe they don't even say sorry, and we pull out all the stops and we make it happen, we just reinforce that, yeah, you can come to us the last minute. We solution very quickly. We start by asking about learning outcomes, giving somebody the impression that, yes, we're going to do the training instead of problem solving first. We measure satisfaction because it's easiest. Satisfaction and knowledge checks. Easy to measure, but don't really show organizational impact. So then we reinforce that we're kind of a nice to have. We work on a flavor of the month strategy. Whatever comes up, we're going to work on instead of a more comprehensive, organizationally aligned strategy. And then my favorite one that really came out of the research and it came out of my own team as well was we show up to help. And when we show up with this helper mindset, we want to help, right? That's why a lot of us go into this profession to begin with. We think, "Oh, I'm here to help. How can I help you? How can I support you?" But when we show up with that in our mindset, we're ready to take notes and check boxes. Because now my goal is to please you. Instead, we need to show up as in this mindset, and this is a huge shift, and it makes a difference even if we just start showing up this way. We show up as partners in problem solving, which establishes us as equals no matter what the hierarchy says. I'm in it here with you, and we're going to find the best solution. So, those are a couple of the things that came out of the research and my own experience.
So I love the example of being the helper because it resonates so much, and I can almost feel the weight of that mindset. And when you talk about being stuck, I give a lot of weight to the mindset of that helper mindset. How do you get unstuck from it?
Well, I think first off, the only way that you can make a change is by starting exactly where you're at using the tools you already have. So, we can't one day walk into a meeting and decide we're going to operate differently and expect everybody else to get it. We
Hmm.
have to do small things. If we're talking about change, we have to do small things that move the needle along. There's a couple of ways to think about this. One is that oftentimes when I talk with learning and talent development teams, we tend to think of this difference between order taker and strategic business partner as opposites first and foremost, which in many ways they are, but they are not one or the other. They really exist along a continuum. So oftentimes there may be some stakeholders that you're working with that very much see you as a partner. And the next hour you might go into a meeting with somebody that very much sees you as an order taker. And so we've got to work to move the needle a little bit at a time. The other thing to think about is that this isn't just a process change for learning and development. And this is why it gets so tricky. If we think that yes, we do need to change some of our processes, but if we think about this only as a process change, only as something we need to change, we're thinking much too small. Because this is a mindset and cultural shift for everyone in the organization about how to best work with learning and talent development. So it's all through small things that we do to gradually move along the continuum. One thing, like when I said some people are going to be more on board with you than others right away, start there. Work with the willing. Go where the energy is. Start to work and build up your relationship and your how you partner with those people differently and then measure. Get the results. Tell the story. Have them tell the story and begin to build that credibility and momentum and culture shift differently,
I
a
love
little
that.
at a time.
Yeah, and I love the mindset shift that you're describing there. And one of the things I've noticed in the work that I've done with a lot of organizations is I talk about moving from that mindset of being an order taker to someone who's solving problems and being that strategic business partner. What I've realized over the years is that I'm saying strategic business partner as if there's just a universal understanding of what that means. And I've discovered that there really isn't. Sometimes you need to define what it means to be a business partner. And I think that's what I'd love to explore in the next segment, what it actually means to move beyond an order taker and what being a strategic business partner really looks like in practice. So we're going to explore that in our next segment. So stay with us.
When a virtual session goes sideways, everyone has a theory, and nobody agrees on why. The facilitator blames the design,
It had to be the design.
the designer blames the delivery,
It has to be the delivery.
the producer blames the brief.
It had to be the brief.
Nobody's wrong. And that's exactly the problem. When everyone's working from a different standard, the blame loop never stops. Facilitators need a clear benchmark for their role. Designers need to know what strong design actually produces, and producers need to know what seamless looks like before the session starts. The Good to Great checklist gives all three roles that answer in one place. Download it for free, then register for our webinar, From Good to Great, the practitioner skills behind consistent live learning. Link in the description.
All right, Jess, so let's move towards what it means to be that strategic business partner. If we move beyond order taking, what does it really mean practically to operate as a business partner for your organization?
This is a question where first I like to just back up to what's the reason why learning and development exists in an organization in the first place?
Oh, I love that.
Because sometimes I think we lose sight of that because no organization in the world that I know of is going to fund an entire department or even just one or two L&D people just to be nice. There's a reason why we exist in the organization. Now, my definition of that is it's our purpose is to equip, enable, and develop the skills and expertise in the organization in order to keep that organization moving forward. And that's kind of that last part is the key piece of this. It's not just to develop skills and expertise for the sake of skills and expertise. There is a purpose. We need to help keep that organization moving forward, overcome challenges, remove blockers, achieve organizational success through people. So to do that, we need to understand the business and how it functions. We need to operate strategically and proactively, making intentional choices about where we spend our time and resources to achieve that purpose. So we're involved in conversations where we can determine the best places to use that skills and expertise, where we can have the biggest impact before we get that request. Because we're then advancing organizational initiatives. We're solving the biggest talent challenges. We're operating like the rest of the business, and we have the metrics that we use to make business decisions based on their movement. Notice I didn't say that those metrics are to prove or justify our role. Those metrics are to make the business decisions to move us forward. And I was able to move my own team to be from a place where we were very much transactional to one where we were operating this way. And it was awesome, David. And then I stepped back and said, why doesn't everybody work this way? And so that's what the difference looks like. And it's all in service of that purpose.
So I want to circle back to what you said earlier in there around the need to understand the business. We hear that
Mm-hmm.
phrase a lot, and I totally agree that we do need to understand the business. But what does that phrase look like for an L&D team? Is that like understanding that McDonald's is in the restaurant business, or is that having an MBA and having a full understanding of how to run a business? What does understand the business mean in the context of L&D?
Yeah, I think that's an excellent question because you're right. We don't need to know everything and anything about the business, but we do need to have a strong understanding of the context of the business. So some of the ways I describe it are, for example, we don't need to be experts in creating balance sheets, but we do need to know what the balance sheet says in terms of the overall story. Where are the revenues coming from? Where are the major expenses? Where are we maybe falling short? We need to know that overall story. Others can create the balance sheet, that's their job, but we do need to know what that is. Some other things we need to know: why the business exists, what are the current challenges, what are the initiatives or goals that the organization is attempting to achieve, what are the key metrics that they're watching. How do the overall operations generally flow? What's the work cadence in terms of, are there times in that organization's workflow when they're less busy or more busy? What's the culture and political landscape? These are the unwritten rules and the maturity level of the organization. So we need to understand this overall context because that's what allows us to align our work both to how the organization functions and the biggest needs that it has. Obviously, if we're a team, which some teams are, and they work with one specific function in the organization, then we need a deeper understanding of that function specifically. But overall, we need to understand the context of the business, where it's moving, how it's planning to get there, and how the work gets done.
It's interesting as I was listening to you. I've had the opportunity to be both a learning leader in a business, but also a business leader in my career. And as I was listening to you, you were not speaking learning language there. You were speaking
Mm-mm.
business language there. For me, as I was listening to you, I was kind of thinking about, well, in order to do what you're describing, that it seems to be that business acumen is on some level part of the equation. How important is business acumen to being a business partner, in your opinion?
Yeah, that is important. That is what I just talked about. All of those things to me do make up business acumen. Having a strong business acumen, being able to speak the language of the business, talk the language of the business, speak the language of our stakeholders, not our L&D language. Those who, what I found in my research, those who were able to be the most successful, they showed up as business leaders with learning expertise. So we don't walk into any room or conversation leading necessarily with our learning expertise. We've got it with us. It's like it's in a backpack on our backs and we brought it along, but we're going to have the conversations from a business lens about what's most important for the business first. And then we're going to figure out where our learning expertise comes into play. And so that's what establishes us as a partner, as a true business partner is speaking that language, showing up with the business in mind first, with our learning expertise ready to go when needed.
I love the description of how you're showing up because I think that that matters in my experience. That matters a lot when to get these discussions. I'm curious from your standpoint, what we're describing here is not binary. It's not we either show up as a learning person or we show up as a business person. And the context that I'm curious about is the external force that's in there because I can't just make the switch of I'm not going to come in there as a learning person. I'm going to come in there as a business person because that person, as we've discussed earlier, may have an expectation that there's a learning person in the room. And I've got to balance my desire to change that perception with meeting them where they're willing to accept that change in possession in that moment. Like getting to be seen as a business partner is not a flipping switch. It's a journey to get to that standpoint. So how do
Mm-hmm.
you kind of read the room to determine how much to introduce in that space?
Well, I'm always a fan of influence through questions as a first way to start. So it is not as important for me to assert everything I know about learning and talent development and in any conversation, but to ask really good questions, if you will, to learn more. And then to ask the questions that essentially tie back to those business needs, those business challenges, whatever I'm hearing and that in and of itself can begin to uplevel that credibility. You're exactly right, David. This is not a one day I show up and I'm a completely different person asking different questions, pretending I'm a using the business language. It happens a little bit at a time over time. But if we do that a little bit in every conversation that we're in and we do our homework, we're paying attention to what's happening in the business on a daily basis. Those that are most successful, when they get the all company emails, when they get the all company, all hands meetings, they don't roll their eyes and say another thing or hit delete. They read them because somebody took the time to put something in there that's important. And when they go into meetings, they're not just listening for their to do items. They're listening a layer above that to, well, what's going on in the business that I need to pay attention to at this point in time? So we're thinking about, yes, we will lean on our learning expertise when it's needed. But first and foremost, our job is to assist in moving that organization forward. And so we need to understand what that is and we need to speak that language.
You also mentioned earlier, in one of the earlier questions we had about the people that you can solve the problems for, those early wins that you can get champions, so to speak. What role, as we make this transition, kind of echoes that. What role do relationships and stakeholder trust play in being able to make this transition in terms of how people perceive you?
Yeah, that's very huge. So relationships and stakeholder trust, it's something that's necessary, or we really won't make any traction if we don't shift that perception. If the stakeholder doesn't trust us in our work, then we're not going to move forward. But that trust also takes time to earn, especially if we're asking somebody to think about it differently. Relationships, first of all, they're more than just being nice and having regular conversation in an organization. So there's a way that I think about business relationships in terms of working with stakeholders, and I think about it in two parts. And it again, we're going to just go back to, this is like a theme of this conversation, but business knowledge and a respected relationship have to go hand in hand. So I figured this out at one point when I had some stakeholders who were difficult to work with, I would say, or tough nuts to crack. There was one woman I really had a tough time with, and I couldn't get her to see me as anything other than the nice training lady. Like, oh, yep, that nice training lady, I'll have a good chat with her. And that's great. I mean, we had a decent relationship in that regard. But I wasn't speaking her language and in terms of the business. And so one day in our meeting, I sat down with her and I said, hey, I know you give metrics to the rest of the organization quarterly so that everybody else can see these. Next time you do that, will you copy me on that? I'd like to see those too. And David, when I first asked that stakeholder looked at me like I had lost my mind. Like, why would you, nice training lady, want to see my metrics? But because we had established that rapport, she gave them to me. She trusted me enough to do that. And I know she fully expected me to never look at them. But I did. And next time I went back to meet with her, I asked about them. And I started to going back to asking those questions, asking questions about her business, asking questions about what these metrics meant, which of them were most concerning to her, which of them told her that the team was doing well. Because now we could start to think about where a learning or talent development solution might be best for her in her business. And so the conversations that we had became less about, oh, how's training going? And isn't it nice that we do this work? And more about, oh, look at these metrics in your business. Let's talk about this. And
Yeah.
we had business level conversations that then elevated me more to that place where I was a business partner to her. So when we talk about relationships and trust, it has to do with understanding that other person and what it's like to sit in their seat and what are the pressures that they're under and what is the business expecting of them. And that's a big piece to it as well. Not just a nice, we meet once a quarter and we have a good conversation.
What I also love about that, and it's a great segue to the final segment that I'd like to have with you, is that it's an example of a small practical thing that over time can have a big impact in shaping the perceptions that people have. The copy me on that email is a very simple thing. It's a very practical, targeted thing that someone could do. But over time, it starts to change the perception of what your role is and the service that you can provide within an organization. And I love that. And in a final segment that we're going to have, I want to get into the weeds of that. I want to get more practical, exploring what it looks like on a day-to-day basis when people start to be strategic performers. What are the things they do, small things that they do every single day that starts making that shift? And we're going to talk about that in our next segment. So stay with us.
Virtual training can fail fast. Long pauses, distracted learners, a facilitator who just reads slides. If your audience isn't engaged, they're not learning. And that's a problem. The truth is, content alone isn't enough. Great facilitation makes the difference. But what if you don't have an expert facilitator on your team? No problem. We do. At InSync Training, our professional facilitators don't just run your sessions. They bring them to life. We take the time to understand your company culture, training goals, and audience needs, ensuring a seamless experience where engagement isn't just encouraged. It's guaranteed. From leadership development and onboarding to global learning initiatives, our facilitators create interactive, results-driven training that sticks. And with our deep expertise in virtual and hybrid environments, we handle all the complexities, so you don't have to. Because great training isn't just about what's being taught, it's how it's being delivered. When the right facilitator is leading, training doesn't just work, it delivers real impact. Don't settle for sessions that fall flat. Let's talk today and make your training unforgettable.
Welcome back. For our last segment, Jess, I want to make this practical. What are some of the biggest shifts L&D professionals need to make in their day-to-day to be seen as strategic business partners?
Yeah. So we've talked about a few of them already, but I'll add in a few more. We've talked about up-leveling business acumen as part of improving our stakeholder relationships. We've talked about showing up as partners in problem solving, first and foremost in our mindset. We've talked about showing up as business partners who understand the business. There's a couple other pieces to this too. Number one is we got to get our own house in order. So we need to have operationally sound learning and talent development teams. We are clear on our processes. We are clear on expectations of our team members. We are clear on what our standards are. We are clear on the roles. We are clear on who we are and how we operate in the business. That's one that I think sometimes we overlook. We're thinking about all these other things, but yet we can't operate well within the business if we're not keeping our own selves in check. Another one is to work according to a business aligned strategy that doesn't have to be set in stone. We can adjust it as needed. But what that means is we're making intentional decisions to use our limited resources in the places where we are going to have the biggest impact. So we're not saying yes just to the loudest voice or the most persistent. We're saying yes in a very strategic way, and that means we're saying no in a strategic way as well. And then the third thing I would say is we've got to get our arms around business measurement. We have to measure beyond satisfaction and knowledge checks because that we need to show that we're fulfilling our purpose in helping the business move forward. And so we need to be partners with the organization. We need to measure collaboratively on the business metrics, not just the satisfaction. So those are a few of the, I would say, day-to-day things to keep in mind.
You mentioned saying yes. And
Mhm.
for some people listening to this, some people on L&D, the fact that that implies a choice might be something that's not even on their radar. But there is agency in that. I mean, how do you decide when to say yes and when you might need to push back on a request?
Yeah, this is one of probably the most important, I would say, decisions or answers you give in learning and talent development, because those who are able to work as strategic business partners, they say yes very intentionally, they say no very intentionally. Now, I've got a decision tree in the book that helps with this, but I can run over a few things to think about. I mean, the most obvious is whether or not a learning solution will solve the problem. And we talk about that a lot. I see a lot of buzz about that, but that shouldn't be the only qualifier because sometimes there's more than that. So, yes, we want to know if a learning solution is going to solve the problem. We also want to know, do I already have something created that will fulfill this request? That's another one of the easy ones. Then we get a little bit more in depth. Does this tie to a larger strategic initiative in the organization? How important is it, in other words, for the organization to have this, whatever learning solution they're asking us for, created? Is it based on a compliance or a newly critical need in the organization? Because sometimes criticalities jump up that we weren't prepared for. And compliance, although we don't like to, I mean, we wish that was different, it's usually above our heads in terms of whether or not we can say yes or no to that. How many people will this impact? I'm a big fan of frequency and volume when it comes to answering requests as well. And all of these should be considered together. Like, for example, how often will this be used? Is it a solution that can scale over time? Are you asking us to create a whole onboarding program for 4 employees on a team that turns over once every 2 years? That probably isn't worth our time, for example. Or are you asking us to create a full onboarding solution for a team that has over 200 people that's regularly turning over? So, frequency and volume. Are we trying to build trust or influence with this stakeholder? So, there's some political questions here too that, yes, if we are, then maybe we say yes and we do a great job. We input some additional questions. We show that we can crack the door and we can do more than just that request, or we want to increase visibility in that area. And then another one of my favorite is, will this avoid future problems? So, do we say yes because down the road, if we don't, we're going to run into more issues? So, there's a lot that goes into it. The secret is really just to make it very intentional and strategic. Because every time we say yes to one thing, we're actually saying no to something else. And
Absolutely.
we all operate in a world with limited time and resources. So we want to make sure that we're using our resources to the best of our abilities to make the biggest impact.
So implied within all of everything that you just shared there is the ability and the responsibility to say no at times. And there are people who struggle with that. And we talked earlier about the importance of relationships and the how important those relationships are to being seen as a strategic business partner. So how do you say no in a way that is not damaging to those relationships that are so important to us?
Yeah. And this is, David, this is one of the biggest questions I get from learning and talent development professionals because they're afraid to say no. They're afraid that if they say no, then we become the department of no. Nobody ever comes to us asking for anything again, right? But what I say is we don't need to take it to that black and white place. In fact, I rarely said no directly in my career. When all my years, over 30 years working internally, I almost rarely said no. Usually I was able to A, redirect to a better solution, ask additional questions, use the that's not going to work right now, but let's circle back. I would love to partner with you to solve this, but we're tapped right now. Here's a few alternatives. So it's one of the things that those who can work more often as strategic business partners do is they're thinking about not just what can't we do, but what can we do? So maybe we can't just say an outright yes to this, but how can we redirect? The other thing that I discovered is that our stakeholders are really smart. Often, if we give them the space to answer and think and we ask really good questions, they realize on their own that maybe training isn't going to solve the problem. They just often don't have the time in their busy days to do this. And so I found this throughout my career as well. By sort of facilitating a conversation, our stakeholders would often get to the place where they'd say, "Oh, maybe we need to fix this first." And I would usually say, "Yeah, go ahead, fix that process first. And then if you're still having a problem, come back to me and let's have a conversation again about whether a training might fit for you, if that might still be needed." And so it's always the "I'm still in your corner" conversation. That's the way that I usually would approach it.
I love that. One of the things that at this stage of my career, I find myself often fascinated with the language that we use as L&D professionals because the language that we use shapes the way that we think and often can shape the way that we practice. So when people are intentional about the language that they use, it catches my attention. One of the phrases that you used in the book that I wanted to ask about is training the business to work with us. I love the intentional use of the language there. What does that actually look like? Because going on this journey, we are training the business. What does that look like? How do we train the business to work with us?
Yeah, we very much are. And this came from one of the smartest, most awesome bosses, leaders I ever worked with in my career. I would have those moments where just like so many of your listeners, I'm sure, we get frustrated. We think, "Oh, they don't understand what it takes for us in learning and development to do our jobs, how much time it takes, how much effort." And I remember one specific day I was kind of complaining about this again because I was just frustrated. And she looked me straight in the eye and said, "Jess, we need to train the business to do business with us." And all of a sudden I realized that I had been blaming everybody else. And I thought, but have we ever told them? Are we expecting that the rest of the business is just going to figure out what's the best way to work with us? It's that we're thinking in full sentences, but are we only speaking in half sentences when we talk to them? And so from there on out, that means we needed to first get really clear about what that even was so that we could all articulate it and everyone on my team could articulate it in the same way. This is what it means to work with us. This is how we generally work with people. These are the types of questions we usually ask. So it's everything from our intake to, these are the typical solutions we usually offer. This is how long it takes. This is how much it costs. This is the typical results. So we have typical measures and metrics that we know if we do this. For example, in our team, if we revamp your onboarding, we're going to cut your time to production by 50%. But we have to do it in this regard. This is the way that we do our processes. We also had defined contributions and roles for our stakeholders and SMEs. So they knew what they were expected to do in every project. And they also knew the consequences if those weren't met. And that everyone on the team was clear on that. They weren't just in someone's head. We were very clear about that. And then the training piece is not training. We're never pulling our stakeholders into a workshop and saying, "This is how you work with the learning and development department." We just weave that into every conversation we have. We're sort of training them without training them in the moment. So, you know what? This time you asked me for a request. I'm going to ask you a few different questions than I normally ask, but hang with me. I want us to get to the best solution. So again, I'm in your corner, but I'm giving you a little bit of training in that, hey, be prepared. Or here's the implications of what you're asking for. Oftentimes, just like all of us, we want a Cadillac, but we don't know we want it for Chevy pricing, right? We want a Cadillac for Chevy pricing. And
Mhm.
we all know what the difference is if we walk onto the car lot, but our stakeholders don't know. They don't know that they're asking for a Cadillac, but they're expecting to get it with the Chevy pricing or the cutbacks or the minimal time or whatever it is. We need to be the ones to define that for them and be clear on what it means and what it takes and the best ways to work with us over time.
I could dig into a lot of the weeds of everything that we've talked about here. I'm really enjoying the conversation, but I want to be mindful of our time here together. I find in conversations like this, when people are listening, they buy in, but they can feel overwhelmed by what feels like the scale of the shift that we're talking about here. Even though it takes time, it could feel overwhelming. And when it feels that the weight of that, it can be difficult to know where to even start. So if someone is listening to everything that we're talking about here and feeling like this is exactly where I am, but I don't know where to start. Beyond just going to Amazon.com today and buying your book, which I highly recommend, what's one place that they can start to make this shift towards being one strategic? What's one small thing they might be able to try tomorrow?
Yeah. The smallest thing that is really usually the best starting point is in the next conversation you have, show up thinking of yourself as a partner in problem solving as opposed to a helper. You might even practice using the language where instead of saying, I'd love to help you with that, you could say, I'd love to partner with you to find the best solution. So start thinking of yourself. It's interesting, David. I've done some activities in workshops before where we do the same role play twice, and the first time we show up as a helper, and the second time we show up as just thinking of ourselves as a partner in problem solving. And it shifts the conversation so powerfully in just that mindset shift. So if nothing else, just think of yourself as I am a partner in problem solving in the next conversation you show up with a stakeholder or really anyone for that matter, and see how that conversation flows differently. That's really the simplest step I can advise.
I love that, and I'm going to use that because I never thought of that. Just as simple as I'd love to partner with you on that. Shift expectations for yourself and the people you're talking to. I love that. So thank you for sharing
Yeah,
that.
the other thing you'll note on that, David, is when you say that, you're not committing to any particular solution. So
Hmm.
you're not saying, yeah, I'd love to create that training for you, or I'd love to help you create that training. You're saying, I'd love to partner with you to find the best solution. So
Excellent.
then that leaves the door a little bit open to where we go from there.
But as I said, I would love to just continue this, and I'd love to have you get back to dig into some of these concepts even deeper. But I love where we're landing here. I mean, you've reminded us that we get stuck in the patterns, and in many ways, our behaviors on a daily basis help reinforce the environment that we're in. The importance of the mindset shift that we're talking about here, and the behaviors that go along with it. That we have to take a journey to our strategic partnerships that are there, not just necessarily flip a switch. And I love where we're closing here on these little small things that we can do on a daily basis that really can give us the momentum. You've given us a lot to think about. Again, I encourage anyone who's listening, if you haven't already done so, go check out the book. It's got this in a great detail, and it's a great read and helps you think about your practice differently. Jess, thanks so much for joining us here today.
Thank you, David.
And to our listeners, if this conversation resonated with you, I'd highly recommend, again, checking out Jess's book, L&D Order Taker No More, where she goes into much deeper into these ideas and everything we've discussed here today, along with practical tools and examples that can help you enhance your practice. And if you're reflecting on your own role, a simple place to start is to just look at the last few requests you've made, that you've taken in, and ask yourself, were you solving a problem or simply responding to that ask? It's a good question to consider for yourself. And as always, be sure to subscribe to Modern Learning on the Air for more conversations like this. We thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you for tuning into Modern Learning on the Air. For all your training and services needs, visit us at insynctraining.com. And don't forget to sign up for our monthly webinars, where we cover key topics and trends in the learning and development space. Until next time, keep learning and keep growing.